No one could have imagined that a single ordinary-looking envelope would ignite a storm that could shake the foundations of the British monarchy. It arrived on a quiet morning, slipping silently through the palace's royal mail system, blending in with the countless routine letters, briefings, and official documents delivered daily. But the moment Princess Anne's fingers grazed the envelope, something primal stirred within her. There was a tension in her chest she could not explain. It wasn't the usual feeling of obligation or routine. It was deeper, sharper. The wax seal, a deep crimson, was unfamiliar, and the handwriting, though hauntingly familiar, carried a weight she couldn't place. It was as if the paper itself carried a secret, daring her to uncover it. Anne hesitated briefly. Normally, she would hand off such an envelope to her private secretary, trusted aide, who managed the endless flood of paperwork the royal family received. But some force, almost instinctual, urged her to open it herself. Her pulse quickened, her heart thumping in rhythm with an unspoken warning. This was no ceremonial note or routine administrative update. As she broke the wax seal and unfolded the single sheet inside. The world around her seemed to pause. At first, her eyes could barely comprehend what she was seeing. The top of the page bore the header of a private laboratory cold, official mark that gave no hint of the storm beneath. Then her gaze landed on the words that would forever alter her. Perception of the royal family DNA test results. The names on the page leaped out with stunning clarity. Diana Spencer, the woman whose life, image, and tragic story had been under relentless public scrutiny, was listed. And alongside her name, another name appeared. One she had never encountered in palace records, completely foreign, yet somehow connected. The final conclusion, written in sharp, unambiguous language, left no room for interpretation. There was a confirmed genetic link between Diana and this unknown individual. A chill raced through Anne's body. The palace walls, familiar and comforting just moments ago, suddenly seemed oppressive. Everything she had known, the predictable rhythm of royal life, tilted violently on its axis. Questions flooded her mind. Who had sent this? Why now? And most terrifyingly, what did this revelation mean for the monarchy and the family she had always considered untouchable? In that instant, Anne realized something profound. She wasn't merely a recipient of a letter, she had been entrusted with a secret capable of rewriting history. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her, heavier than any ceremonial duty she had ever carried. And she knew, even before fully digesting the contents, that nothing about her life, for the royal family, would ever be the same again. The palace mornings were always predictable. Endless briefings, a mountain of letters, documents with embossed royal crests, and ceremonial schedules that left little room for surprise. Princess Anne had long grown accustomed to this rhythm. Her instincts, once sharp and attuned to unusual events, had been dulled by decades of routine and duty. Yet, the envelope in her hand that morning pierced through the monotony. Like a shard of ice dot, unlike the other letters that arrived with pomp, or the unmistakable insignia of royal authority, this one was different. There was no crest, no embossed logo to signal importance. Instead, a crimson wax seal was pressed firmly into the paper, bearing a design she didn't recognize. The symbol seemed almost taunting, staring back at her like a quiet challenge. It demanded attention, and Anne could feel the tension building in her chest. Something about it whispered that this was not ordinary, that it was meant for her eyes alone. For a fleeting moment, she considered passing it to her private secretary, as was her custom. Yet, instinct overrode habit. A subtle, insistent pull urged her to open the letter herself. She hesitated, fingers hovering over the wax. Her heartbeat quickened not from excitement, but from an unexplainable sense of foreboding. Something buried deep within her seemed to recognize the weight of what lay ahead, as if a hidden part of her already knew the content would not be routine. Breaking the wax cleanly, and unfolded the single sheet inside. At first, her eyes skimmed the words, trying to absorb them as one absorbs any ordinary report. But these words weren't ordinary. The header belonged to a private laboratory, cold and clinical. Beneath it, the text leapt at her with brutal clarity. DNA test results. Her gaze traveled down the page, stopping at the names. Diana Spencer. Every letter seemed to echo the ghost of her late and then another name, one she had never seen in official records, completely foreign, yet undeniably linked. The conclusion at the bottom was clear, sharp, and irrefutable. A confirmed genetic connection existed between Diana and this unknown individual. Anne's hands trembled. Her mind raced. The palace, the world she had always known, suddenly felt fragile. Like a carefully built structure, teetering on the edge of collapse. Routine, predictability, ceremonial illusions shattered in a single moment. This wasn't a scandal to be whispered about behind closed doors. This was a revelation that could challenge everything. Anne's eyes could barely process what she was seeing. The envelope had been unusual enough, but the sheet she now held in her hands was extraordinary. At the top of the page was the crisp, official header of a private laboratory, sterile and impersonal. Yet beneath that clinical exterior lay words that would reverberate through her entire life. DNA test results. Asterisk. The names on the page hit her with the weight of a hammer. Diana Spencer, her late sister-in-law, the beloved princess whose life had been meticulously chronicled, celebrated, and scrutinized by the world, was listed. And next to her name, another name appeared, one Anne had never encountered in any official capacity. No palace record, no public reference, nothing. A ghost in the archives, yet biologically linked to Diana. Asterisk. Anne's breath caught. Her mind tried to rationalize what she saw. Could it be a clerical error? A mistake? She scanned the conclusions again. No ambiguity, no room for misinterpretation. The report confirmed a genetic connection between Diana and this unknown individual. Her world, once polished, predictable, and meticulously ordered, tilted violently on its axis. Questions surged in her mind like a tidal wave. Who had sent this? Why now, decades after Diana's death? And most terrifyingly, what did this mean for the royal family, for the monarchy itself? The revelation was more than personal, it was institutional. The monarchy, built on bloodlines, succession, and the clarity of lineage, suddenly faced a fracture at its very core. Anne's fingers trembled as she read every line repeatedly. Each phrase, each statistic, each carefully documented result screamed a truth long concealed. This wasn't rumor, gossip, or tabloid fabrication. This was scientific proof. The consequences were monumental. If this information reached the public, it could shake the monarchy to its foundations, challenge the carefully maintained narratives, and rewrite royal history. Asterisk. Her mind flashed back to Diana's cryptic remarks, whispered confessions, and private diaries. Could these have been clues, breadcrumbs left for someone she trusted to find? Every diary entry, every note, suddenly took on new significance. Diana's secret wasn't speculation, it was a carefully guarded reality. Anne realized something profound. The envelope, the report, the secrecy, it was all meant for her. She wasn't merely a recipient. She was entrusted with a truth that could alter centuries of tradition and power. And with that responsibility came a heavy burden. The palace's walls, once a symbol of order and security, now felt like a cage holding secrets too explosive to ignore. As Anne held the DNA report, a flood of memories and half-forgotten moments returned with startling clarity. Diana had always been a woman who spoke in whispers, cryptic remarks that seemed harmless at the time. Passing comments during family gatherings or in quiet corners. For years, Anne had dismissed them as melancholy, as emotional turbulence from a woman trapped in the relentless glare of public life. But now, faced with undeniable scientific proof, those words took on an entirely new meaning. Every diary entry, every letter, every seemingly innocuous comment suddenly glimmered with significance. Diana had left breadcrumbs, hints carefully scattered across her private world diaries, tucked away. Letters sent to trusted confidants, notes scribbled in the margins of otherwise mundane documents. At the time, Anne had viewed these as personal musings or poetic musings from a sister-in-law struggling under the weight of public life. But now, they weren't just reflections. They were warnings, guides meant for someone capable of understanding their significance. Anne's mind raced as she revisited moments she had long forgotten. Diana's sudden disappearances from public events, her cryptic references to keeping things safe, and lines like "when they are ready, they'll understand" now made sense in a chilling new light. These weren't random statements. They were deliberate signals. Diana had known that someone would one day need to follow the trail she had carefully left behind. She had trusted Anne, perhaps more than anyone else, to piece together the fragments of truth scattered through her life. The implications were staggering. Diana had prepared for the day when her secrets could no longer remain hidden. Every subtle warning, every cautious confession, had been a part of a plan. The princess had anticipated the monarchy's walls of silence, the mechanisms of control, the way her voice could be silenced before it was heard. And yet, she had left a trail, a quiet resistance hidden within her words, her diaries, and her letters, waiting for the right person to uncover it. Anne's chest tightened. The monarchy, built on tradition, protocol, and secrecy, had no idea that Diana had left an invisible map leading to a revelation that could shatter carefully maintained appearances. And now, the first piece of that map, the DNA report, had landed in her hands. She realized, with a mixture of fear and determination, that following this trail was no longer optional. Diana had entrusted her with a responsibility heavier than any royal duty, a responsibility that could alter history itself. The realization hit Anne like a thunderclap. Diana's cryptic notes, whispered confessions, and private diaries weren't just emotional musings, they were fragments of a puzzle, leading to a truth deliberately concealed. The DNA report confirmed what no one in the palace could imagine. Diana had a child whose existence had been meticulously erased from official records. Anne's mind replayed countless moments in her memory. Diana's sudden disappearances from public engagements, explained away as private retreats or humanitarian trips, now aligned eerily with gaps in official documentation. Small details that had once seemed inconsequential, the quiet urgency in Diana's letters, the cautious glances she would cast toward trusted confidants, took on an entirely new, chilling significance. These had not been random acts. They were deliberate maneuvers to protect someone hidden, yet intimately connected to her. Asterisk, the DNA report contained initials, a seemingly ordinary set of letters that, at first glance, meant nothing. But Anne's instinct screamed that these initials were a key, a thread leading to a life deliberately hidden from the public eye, a child born into secrecy, away from the gilded walls of the palace, their identities scrubbed clean, erased from official records, yet biologically linked to Diana. The more she examined the documents, the clearer it became. This was not rumor, tabloid speculation, or gossip. It was history buried deliberately, waiting to be unearthed. Anne's thoughts turned to the broader implications. The monarchy, built on lineage and succession, relied on the clarity of bloodlines, and now, a hidden thread threatened to unravel the tapestry of tradition. Whoever had orchestrated the concealment had done so with meticulous precision. Records altered, hospital entries erased, traces removed, every step carefully calculated to ensure the child's existence remained a secret. Asterisk, the weight of the revelation pressed down on Anne. This was more than a personal shock. It was a constitutional, dynastic upheaval waiting silently behind palace doors. Diana's foresight, her deliberate secrecy, had created a trail that only someone perceptive, someone within the inner circle, could follow. And now, that responsibility had fallen squarely onto Anne. She wasn't merely uncovering history, she was being entrusted with a living secret whose implications could reshape the monarchy itself. Anne couldn't ignore the implications of the DNA report. If Diana's child existed, someone inside the palace had known about it all along. The more she reflected, the more it became clear. This wasn't an accident, nor a simple oversight. It was a carefully orchestrated conspiracy, designed to erase a life from history, to maintain the illusion of perfection, control, and power within the royal institution. Her thoughts immediately turned to the inner workings of the palace. Who had the influence, the reach, and the foresight to manipulate records, control narratives, and quietly remove evidence of a secret that could shake the monarchy. For decades, she realized, information had been meticulously redirected, altered, and concealed, leaving no trace for casual eyes or even the most diligent archivist. The palace wasn't just hiding the truth. It had actively rewritten history to ensure the child's existence remained unknown. Anne's pulse quickened as she traced the threads of memory. The former palace doctor who had quietly resigned years earlier, mysterious notations in foreign medical ledgers, discrepancies in hospital records and overseas trip logs, each anomaly, once dismissed as mundane or inconsequential, now aligned perfectly with Diana's absences. It became chillingly apparent. Someone had executed this cover-up with precision. Knowing exactly how to avoid detection, the magnitude of the conspiracy shook Anne to her core. This wasn't merely about secrecy. It was about power. Every alteration, every missing file, every erased document was a calculated move to preserve the monarchy's image at any cost. And yet, Diana had anticipated this. Her diaries, letters, and cryptic warnings weren't random. They were breadcrumbs leading someone she trusted to uncover the truth. Anne understood now that the palace's polished exterior was a facade, meticulously maintained to protect both reputation and control. The very institution she had devoted her life to safeguarding had participated in a decades-long suppression of reality. Hiding a living child whose existence could challenge centuries of tradition. The walls that once seemed comforting now felt suffocating. Holding secrets too explosive to remain buried. Determined, Anne realized she could no longer rely on routine or silence. The conspiracy had to be unraveled, piece by piece, and the truth brought to light. The first step was understanding the full extent of the deception, how deep it ran, who had orchestrated it, and why. One thing was certain, the palace had kept Diana's secret for decades. And now it was Anne's responsibility to uncover it before the truth was lost forever. Investigation quickly revealed that the conspiracy was not just an institutional cover-up, it had human architects. Her thoughts immediately turned to Charles and Camila. For decades, they had wielded influence quietly, maneuvering behind the scenes, their decisions shaping the palace's inner workings without public scrutiny. And now, confronted with Diana's hidden child, it became clear that both had played roles in maintaining the silence. She recalled the subtle cues, the guarded expressions, the knowledge in Charles's eyes that had always been difficult to read. There had always been a tension between transparency and protection in his demeanor. A careful balance that now seemed less like restraint and more like conscious complicity. Camila too had long survived the palace's storms, not through public defiance, but through mastery of secrecy. Her power was invisible but formidable, rooted in her ability to control information, to influence outcomes from the shadows, and new confrontation was inevitable. When she approached Charles with the DNA report, she saw in his eyes something far worse than shock, recognition. He already understood the weight of the secret, the consequences of exposure, and the historical truth he had maintained in silence. Every carefully constructed defense of the monarchy, every decision made in the name of duty, had carried the quiet burden of knowing this child existed. Camila's role was subtler, but no less pivotal. Years of whispered intelligence, discreet investigations, and careful observation had given her access to pieces of Diana's secret, allowing her to anticipate the repercussions before anyone else. When Anne confronted her, Camila didn't panic or deny. Instead, she smiled knowing. The calculated smile that revealed her mastery over the game the palace had long played in secrecy. Anne realized the truth. Charles had carried the burden of silence, justifying it as preservation of the monarchy. Camila had wielded the secret as leverage, consolidating her power through knowledge alone. Both had protected themselves and the institution, while Diana's child remained hidden, invisible to history. The revelation left Anne both furious and determined. The palace, she now understood, had operated as a calculated machine, prioritizing image over truth, preservation over justice. Diana's voice had been silenced, her child erased, And yet, Anne held the key to undoing it all, had followed the trail carefully, piecing together every clue, every diary entry, every suppressed record. And now, the culmination of decades-long secrecy was about to step out of the shadows. Diana's son hidden from the world, erased from history. Yet undeniably, real was about to emerge. The realization of his existence brought a storm of emotions: relief, fear, awe, and an overwhelming sense of responsibility pressed down on Anne for years. This child had lived in deliberate obscurity, shielded from the gaze of the monarchy and the public. His life had been carefully constructed to avoid attention, yet every step he had taken was intrinsically linked to the legacy of Diana herself. And understood the magnitude, this was not just a revelation of a hidden life. It was the unveiling of a human being whose existence challenged the very foundations of royal history. The first encounter was arranged with absolute secrecy. No aides, no courtiers, no official record. Anne knew that the stakes were immense. This was not a political maneuver, but a deeply personal reckoning. As the door opened and he entered, the resemblance was striking. Diana's eyes, her quiet fire, her innate strengths, they lived in him. It was impossible to deny the connection, and in that instant, the truth leaped out from documents and whispers into reality. He spoke calmly, his voice steady, shaped by years of living in the shadows, of watching his mother's life dissected from afar, of understanding without the privileges of recognition. He recounted his childhood abroad, the deliberate obscurity, and the subtle guidance passed from Diana through trusted intermediaries. Every word confirmed what Anne had pieced together. The child had not only survived, but had been quietly nurtured to one day understand his identity and legacy. Anne listened, overwhelmed by emotion. The child was more than a hidden figure. He was the living embodiment of Diana's unspoken story. His existence was proof that secrets, no matter how carefully guarded, eventually demanded acknowledgement. And in that room, the weight of decades of palace secrecy, of silenced voices and erased histories, hung heavy. After decades of secrets, silence, and carefully maintained appearances, Anne knew it was time to bring the truth into the light. The world had believed Diana's story was complete, her life and legacy neatly wrapped within public memory. But now, standing beside her, was the living proof of a chapter the monarchy had worked tirelessly to erase: Diana's hidden son. The press briefing was arranged with precision, yet outside, speculations surged like wildfire. News outlets, social media, and whispers in royal circles all collided, eager to understand why a steadfast, composed royal would suddenly shatter decades of tradition. As she stepped forward, the weight of responsibility pressed on her chest. This was no longer a private revelation, it was a global reckoning. Anne's words were calm, measured, yet carried the force of decades of suppressed truth. She confirmed the DNA test, explained the concealment, and introduced Diana's son to the world. The reaction was immediate and seismic. Headlines exploded across continents. News channels interrupted programming. For the first time in generations, the monarchy's carefully curated image was confronted by reality, raw and unfiltered. Across the Commonwealth and beyond, shockwaves rippled. Citizens, scholars, and media alike grappled with the magnitude of the revelation. The monarchy, long seen as untouchable, suddenly faced questions it could no longer control. Public discourse shifted from admiration and ceremony to astonishment, debate, and scrutiny. The narrative that had shaped decades was being rewritten in real time. Inside the palace, the consequences were immediate. Charles and Camila, long masters of discretion and control, found their influence fractured. Decisions made to protect secrets now appeared as deliberate manipulation. Their carefully maintained facade cracked under global scrutiny, revealing a truth too powerful to suppress. Anne had not only unveiled Diana's son, she had exposed a web of hidden complicity within the institution itself. The significance was both personal and historical. For Diana, whose voice had been silenced too soon, justice, if delayed, was finally being acknowledged. For her son, the revelation was a liberation from decades of erasure. And for Anne, it was a triumph of courage, loyalty, and commitment to truth over tradition. The world had witnessed a revelation that no royal family could have contained. Diana's son, hidden for decades, had finally stepped into the light, his existence undeniable. The palace, once a symbol of impenetrable tradition, now faced a reckoning of history, secrecy, and legitimacy. For Princess Anne, the weight of truth pressed heavier than any crown. She had upheld the monarchy's image her entire life. Yet now she stood at the crossroads of tradition and revelation, and understood that this was not merely a personal story. The monarchy's structure, succession, and public perception were all at stake. By acknowledging Diana's son, she had rewritten the rules of royal legacy. The public's gaze was no longer a silent observer. It was active, demanding transparency, accountability, and recognition of a truth that the palace had long buried. Anne's actions had shifted the balance of power from secrecy to honesty, forcing an institution built on controlled narratives to confront reality. Inside the palace, tensions ran high. Charles and Camila, who had relied on silence and manipulation to maintain authority, now faced unprecedented scrutiny. Their carefully constructed narrative had crumbled under the weight of Anne's courage and the undeniable proof of Diana's hidden child. Courtiers, aides, and insiders were forced to confront the reality that their allegiance to secrecy had limits and that the world would no longer accept omissions as truth. For Diana's son, the revelation was transformative. No longer hidden, he had the opportunity to define his own life, free from decades of imposed invisibility. Yet the responsibility was immense. His existence challenged centuries of tradition, questioned the very fabric of royal hierarchy, and introduced a living reminder of past suppression. Anne's role as protector and advocate was now crucial. Her promise to Diana to ensure her truth would be acknowledged had become a guiding force in the monarchy's evolution. Princess Anne's courage did more than reveal a hidden child, it forced the monarchy to confront its own secrets. The world watched as tradition met truth, and the future of the royal family was rewritten forever. As cameras faded, and the world digested the news, one thing was clear: nothing would ever be the same. Diana's voice, once silenced, now resonated through history, carried by her son, and preserved through Anne's unwavering determination. The monarchy had survived, but it had been irrevocably transformed. The question now remained: how would it rise, adapt, and reckon with the truth that had finally come home?